Hello and welcome to another video of this series about object-oriented programming. In this hands-on video about class methods, so the static methods, I'll demonstrate in the IDE how to implement them so they can be used in order to solve the problem we had with the addition of a public static member variable in the previous version, version 6. In version 6, I demonstrated an interesting usage of class members, namely that of counting the amount of created instances of a class. That can be achieved very easily by adding a static count member and increasing that counter in the constructor. So every time a new object is created. But in the current version, count is public. And by doing so, I open the door to the following problem. Since it is public, any client can change its value, resulting in an improper use of that variable. So what I do here in the client, I print the count variable, and since it is a public class member, I can access it directly by prefixing it with the name of the class dots. Then I create 4 objects, 1 and print them out, 2, 3, 4. But then the client decides to increment the value 3 times more, resulting in an invalid last count that is printed out. So let's run the client. So the first line, 0 rectangles created, is correct. This one. Then we create our 4 objects and print them out. But then the last line should be 4, because we created 4 objects. And what do we see? 7 objects created. And that is because the client incremented the value 3 times. And that should not be allowed. How to prevent this? By implementing an OO concept that I've demonstrated in earlier version Drawing App 1.3. So let's have a look at that version. Encapsulation validation in the rectangle. I encapsulated the instance member variables x, y, height and width. I set them private, and for each member variable I created a pair of getters and setters. GetX, setX. And I did the same with the other variables. So I implemented encapsulation. Here, in order to solve our problem, we need to encapsulate class member count as well. And that is what version 7 is all about. So first I create the necessary packages for version 7. In lib, right-click, new package, demo7 class methods. Do the same in the app package, new package, demo7. Copy the necessary classes, so rectangle, copy, paste in demo7. And the client from 6, copy, paste in 7. And in the client, make sure that I import version 7. Class methods, rectangle. Run the code to check whether everything's fine. Okay. So how to solve this? In the rectangle class, encapsulate the count member. So first step is set the count to private. Private. That will result in some compiler errors in the client. The client doesn't have access anymore, which is what we want, because we don't want him to just change that value as he pleases. Second step is add a getter. So for that, I'm going to scroll down for a sec and add a new comment section. Class getters. Public static int get counts. And it's just doing one thing, return the counts. We don't provide any setter, not even with validation, because we don't want anybody but the rectangle class to control the value of the counter. So let's test it in the client. First of all, get rid of these lines. I put them in comments so we still see what the client was able to do before. And instead of accessing the count directly, instead we invoke the getCount methods. Once and twice. Let's run the code. And now, as could be predicted, so 0 rectangles created, that's for the top one. Then our 4 objects. And since we only created 4 objects, we have 4 rectangles created. Because the client can't do this anymore. The only thing he can do is read the property. And this is kind of what we do. We encapsulated the count variable by setting it private. We provided a public getter, but no setter. So that way we implement a read-only property. Since that is the only thing the client can do, it's read the property. A few remarks regarding the use of static methods. First of all, a static method can be invoked without having to create an object first. And this is what we clearly see when executing this line. The client invokes the getCount method, but without having created any object. This happens after the invocation. So we don't need an object reference in order to invoke a static method. Then second, static methods are never related to an instance of a class. Again, we see that very clearly because we don't use any object reference. And since they're never related to an instance of a class, there is no dispointer available in the method. If we go to the getCount method, if I would try to do the following, precede count by this dot, I will get a compiler error saying this cannot be referenced from a static context. And this is what I explained in the introduction video. Since class members, whether member variables or methods, are not related to any particular instance of rectangle, do they on the other hand apply to the class and so not to a particular object. So I have to remove these dots. Now, if I go back to the client, still the following is possible. Suppose I want to execute this line in another way. Copy paste by using a reference variable. Let's say rect1, and I can do that. The only thing I get is a compiler warning. Static member accessed via instance reference. There's no error. I can execute this. There is absolutely no problem. And I have 4 rectangles created twice. But what did I just say? That static members are not related to any particular instance of a class. This is not what this statement suggests. Well, the remarks I mentioned just a minute ago are still valid, making this statement confusing. This should, to my opinion, be a compiler error and not a compiler warning, because it doesn't make sense. Just reading this could make a developer think that, oh, the getCount method is an instance method and not a class method. It affects code readability and the knowledge of the rectangle class. What I normally do is change this warning to a compiler error in the settings. And how do I do this? Well, go to the File, Settings, and there type access static member and select inspections. And here we have in the declaration redundancy section, access static member via instance reference. If I click on this, it is set to warning. Well, what I do is I set this to error. Apply. And what we get now is indeed an error. Feel free to add any comments if you can give me a sensible argument why this is allowed, why this is not always a compiler error. I put this line in comments. This for the implementation of class methods, and time to tackle a problem we are faced with now. Suppose our client would like to create a new rectangle, but this time by passing just 3 arguments. So let me create some space first, remove this here, and copy those 2 lines. And at the bottom, I create a new rectangle, rect5, but now the client just wants to create a square, specifying x and y, but then just one size. And that size will be used to set the height and the width. And so the client wants to create a square. Right now it's not possible. Why? Because there is no constructor in the rectangle class to which we can pass 3 arguments. How to enable it? Well, add a 3 parameters constructor in class rectangle. Go to the rectangle class and then add our new constructor with 3 parameters. I put it in between the constructor with 2 parameters and 4 parameters. As mentioned in an earlier video, the criterion that I use in order to implement constructors is by increasing amount of parameters. Copy this one, copy paste, and so my parameter list looks like int x, int y, and then int size. Okay, I'm going to type set x, set y, set height, size, and set width, size as well. And let's test this in the client. Print 5, and then I want to print out the amount of rectangles that were created. So I copy this line down here. Run the code. And what do we note? These are the last 2 lines that were printed out. Rectangle 5, our height and width are set to the same value, 100, so that's correct. But the amount of rectangles created is not correct. We created in total 5 rectangles, from 1 to 5. So the count should be 5, and it didn't do it. Suppose this was implemented by someone who is new to Java, doesn't know anything about chaining constructors, and just received the instructions. The 3 parameters constructor must set x and y and use the same side for height and width. So by not invoking the constructor with most parameters, we forgot to increment our counts. Okay, in this demo, I knew what I was doing, but this is something which could happen. The compiler is not going to complain. If we don't want to chain our constructors, the compiler will not enforce us to do this. If we forget to increment the count, so be it. There's no warning, there's no error which will make us halt and have a look at our code. The code just compiles, but the output is not correct. How can we prevent this from happening? And I'm referring to this count, because the count is not valid. We added a new constructor, we forgot to increment the count. How can we not forget to increment the count every time a new object will be created? That's what I'll demonstrate in version 8, where I'll implement the concept of initialization blocks. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, thanks for pressing the like button and or subscribing to my channel. Bye bye.